I am sitting here watching something completely unravel in real time. And what makes it dangerous, what makes this moment genuinely alarming, is not just that the story is false. It is that the story was designed to move markets, shape headlines, and reassure the public into looking away. This is the anatomy of a manufactured reality. And in the next few minutes, I am going to show you exactly how it was built, exactly where it fell apart, and exactly why the gap between what was announced and what is actually happening on the ground could light the fuse on the most volatile situation in the Middle East in decades. Stay with me, because most of what you have heard about the Strait of Hormuz in the last 24 hours is wrong. If you have not subscribed to David Unfiltered yet, do it now. Yes, we cover the stories that fall between the cracks of the mainstream news cycle. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because events like this one do not wait for business hours and the situation changes by the hour. Let us go back. Not 72 hours, not a week. Let us go back to the morning of April 17th, 2026, and trace this minute by minute. It began with a phone call. Not a press conference, not a formal statement, not a joint communique signed in a neutral capital by foreign ministers standing in front of flags. Donald Trump picked up the phone, called a handful of journalists, CBS, Reuters, and Axios reporter Barak Ravid, a reporter known for his proximity to the Netanyahu government, and he dictated a series of extraordinary claims. And those reporters, every single one of them, published those claims verbatim. And no independent verification, no countersourcing, no line that read, "We could not independently confirm this," from a second source. Word for word, as if they were sitting in a stenographer's booth just off the Oval Office taking notes on history as it was being invented. The markets reacted instantly. Oil prices, which had been hovering near $100 a barrel, still far above the pre-war levels of around $70 that existed before February 28th, lurched downward on the news. Wall Street futures spiked, headlines cascaded across financial terminals. And around the world, the assumption quietly calcified. The Strait of Hormuz is open. A deal has been reached. The worst is over. Except none of it was true. Here is what Trump told those reporters. He said the Strait of Hormuz was now fully open and under American control. He said the United States would be sending excavators into Iran, working alongside the Iranian military to retrieve uranium stockpiles and what he called nuclear dust, a reference to the aftermath of the American B-2 bomber strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities during Operation Midnight Hammer in June 2025, and bring it all back to the United States. He said Iran would no longer finance its regional allies, including Hezbollah. He said no money would change hands between the US and Iran. He said there would be no tolls for ships. He said American military vessels would have free passage. He said Iran had agreed to everything. Then he called CBS directly and told them Iran's agreed to everything, that they are going to work with the United States to remove its buried stockpile of highly enriched uranium, and that American and Iranian workers together would go in with excavators and take it back to the United States. 7 claims, 1 phone call, 0 verification, and Iran's parliament speaker, Mohammad Bakr Kalibaf, the lead negotiator and one of the most senior figures in the Iranian government, responded with a statement that should have immediately ended the fantasy. He posted publicly that the President of the United States made 7 claims in 1 hour, and all 7 of them are false. He went further. He wrote that they did not win the war with these lies, and they will certainly not get anywhere in negotiations either. He was explicit. With the continuation of the blockade, the Strait of Hormuz will not remain open. Passage through the Strait of Hormuz will be conducted based on the designated route and with Iranian authorization. Whether the strait is open or closed and the regulations governing it will be determined by the field, not by social media. That is not ambiguous. That is Iran's legislative leadership on the record calling every single Trump claim false, point by point, in sequence. But here is where it gets worse, because it is not just Iran saying one thing and Trump saying another. The shipping data is saying something too, and the shipping data does not lie. What analysts who were actually tracking vessel movements in the Strait of Hormuz on Friday morning observed was this. Ships began entering the strait, and then one after another, they executed U-turns. Not a few, many. Commercial vessels, tankers, cargo ships, they moved toward the strait. They heard Trump's announcement. Some of them attempted transit, and they turned back around. You could follow it in the real-time data stream. That is the market speaking in the clearest language it knows. That is the practical response of captains and shipping companies who, when they looked at what was actually on the water, did not trust that what Trump was claiming matched the operational reality of transiting through Iranian-patrolled waters without Iranian authorization. Let me now tell you what was actually true. On Friday, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi did post that the Strait of Hormuz would be open to commercial shipping traffic. That part is real, but the conditions attached to that opening are everything, and those conditions directly contradict every major claim Trump made. According to Iran's foreign ministry statement, passage would follow a designated route set by Iran that is coordinated with Iranian authorities for commercial vessels only and only for the duration of the 10-day ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon, a ceasefire slated to expire on April 22nd. That is it. That is the deal, such as it is. No American military ships. Iran explicitly stated those are banned. No transfer of uranium anywhere under any circumstance. Iran's words, not mine. No American excavators going into Iranian territory. Iran said, that will never happen. The coordination of vessels goes through the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The route is approved by Iran. Each ship is subject to Iranian authorization. As Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson explained with precision that cannot be misread, coordinated means it goes through the route approved by the IRGC. Commercial vessels means non-military ships. Words have meaning, and every word in that Iranian statement is load-bearing. And what those words describe is not the fully open, American-controlled Strait of Hormuz that Trump announced to CBS, to Reuters, to Axios. What those words describe is a managed, temporary, Iranian-controlled corridor for commercial traffic. That is not a breakthrough. That is not a new deal. That is barely a departure from the coordination framework that Iran had been selectively applying to a small number of tankers even during the war. And Trump himself, in a Truth Social post issued later that same day, then contradicted his own announcement by writing in capital letters that the naval blockade will remain in full force and effect as it pertains to Iran only until such time as the transaction with Iran is 100% complete. His own post says the blockade is still in effect, and Iran's response to a continuing blockade is already unambiguously on the record. If the blockade continues, the strait closes. Kulibaf made this explicit. So the situation as of right now is this. A 10-day ceasefire expires April 22nd. A strait that is open by Iranian terms, not American terms. A blockade that Trump says remains in full force. And both sides claiming the other is lying about the terms of what was agreed. This is not a deal. This is a pause so fragile it could shatter before you finish watching this video. Subscribe to David Unfiltered. Turn on notifications. This is the kind of story that breaks at 2 a.m. Now let us talk about the Russian oil sanctions, because this subplot is receiving almost no attention and it deserves serious scrutiny. 2 days before the Strait of Hormuz announcement, your Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent stood at a podium and told reporters in direct and unambiguous language that the United States will not be renewing the general license on Russian oil. He said the same about Iranian oil. He was explicit, on camera. The clip exists. There is no ambiguity about what he said. Friday night, in the middle of the night, a Friday night news dump, one of the oldest tricks in the political communications playbook, the Treasury Department quietly issued a notice extending the pause on sanctions affecting Russian oil shipments for another 30 days. This extends a similar license that had been issued in March. Russian oil buyers, for another month, can operate outside the full reach of US sanctions. Russia, in the middle of a conflict in which it is not a formal party, but absolutely a beneficiary, now just received a significant economic gift. So Bessent said publicly and emphatically that they are not doing this. And then they did it, the night before a major geopolitical announcement, when nobody was watching. This is not a policy inconsistency. This is not confusion within the administration. This is an administration that says whatever is useful in the moment and then does whatever the market and the geopolitical situation actually requires. The pattern is now too consistent to call it chaos. It is deliberate. The lie is the policy. The announcement is the management instrument. And the Friday night notice is the actual decision. Meanwhile, as all of this was unfolding, Trump also made a statement about Israel and Lebanon that briefly sent shockwaves through every diplomatic channel. He posted that Israel will not be bombing Lebanon any longer and that they are prohibited from doing so by the USA. That single post shocked the Netanyahu government. According to Axios, Israel immediately asked the White House for clarification. Then, within hours, a US official walked it back. The clarification stated that Israel clearly retains its right to self-defense against planned, imminent, or ongoing attacks, which, as anyone who has followed Israeli military doctrine for 5 minutes knows, means nothing changes. Israel has defined every military operation in Lebanon as self-defense against ongoing threats. The clarification was not a policy, it was a permission slip written in the passive voice. And within moments of that clarification being issued, multiple Lebanon-based journalists were reporting new Israeli strikes on Lebanese targets. The bombs kept falling. So let us zoom out and look at the strategic architecture of what has happened here, because it matters enormously. The Strait of Hormuz is not a secondary waterway. It is not a regional footnote. Before this war began in late February 2026, roughly 20% of the world's total oil consumption passed through that strait. Somewhere between 18 and 19 million barrels per day of oil, condensate, and fuel. OPEC members, including Saudi Arabia, Iran, the UAE, Kuwait, and Iraq, export most of their crude through it. Qatar, the world's largest LNG exporter, sends almost all of its liquefied natural gas through it, accounting for around a quarter of global LNG consumption. The strait itself is only 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, with the actual shipping lane just 2 miles across in each direction. 2 miles wide. That is the choke point that 20% of global energy flows through every single day. When Iran's foreign minister posted the Hormuz reopening announcement on Friday morning, markets moved with extraordinary speed. Brent crude dropped over 9%, with WTI falling more than 11% in a single day. Wall Street hit fresh record highs, and analysts at major financial institutions began talking about lower oil prices acting as a disinflationary tailwind, improving margin outlooks across the board. Markets believed they were seeing a first step, a turning point, a door opening. And now let me show you why that belief may be the most dangerous thing that happened on Friday. Here is the reality that market euphoria is obscuring. The ceasefire expires April 22nd. The blockade remains in full force by Trump's own declaration. The nuclear negotiation includes Iran's demands for sanctions relief, compensation for war damages, and ironclad guarantees that hostilities will fully and permanently cease. Iran insists that all resistance elements across all fronts must be treated as a single negotiating unit. That means Hezbollah, the Houthi movement in Yemen, and Iran-aligned militias in Iraq, all treated as one bloc, non-separable at the negotiating table. Iran's foreign ministry called this explicitly non-negotiable. And the United States. The United States is maintaining a naval blockade of Iranian ports, claiming Iran agreed to hand over its enriched uranium and let American excavators in, is lifting Russian oil sanctions in the middle of the night, 2 days after its own Treasury Secretary said it would not, and walking back a statement about Israeli strikes on Lebanon within the same news cycle in which that statement was made. These two realities, Iran's stated red lines and America's stated achievements, cannot coexist. One of them has to give, and if neither gives before April 22nd, the next phase of this conflict could be significantly more dangerous and more destructive than the one the markets have just priced out. Here is the specific danger being underestimated right now. Every ship that acts on Trump's announcement of a fully open strait and sails through without Iranian coordination, without following the designated route, without IRGC authorization, is a potential flashpoint. Iran's foreign ministry has already stated any U.S. naval blockade will be met with a proportional Iranian response. Iran's armed forces are explicitly tasked with enforcing transit measures in the strait. The foreign ministry stated this clearly. Control over the Strait of Hormuz will be determined on the ground, not in media and social media narratives. So you have an American president who told the world the strait is open and under U.S. control, and you have Iran telling the world it controls the strait and will enforce its rules with its military. The overlap between those two versions of reality, that narrow zone where both claims collide on the same body of water, is where accidents happen. It is where miscalculations happen. It is where a tanker captain following White House press guidance encounters an IRGC patrol boat, and a diplomatic crisis is born in 60 seconds, at a moment when the ceasefire is measured in days, at a moment when both sides have already demonstrated over months of escalating conflict that they will respond militarily when they believe their red lines have been crossed. This is the part the market rally did not price. The market priced a deal. The market did not price a deal that each side describes in mutually incompatible terms, enforced in the same body of water by two different militaries with opposite instructions expiring in 4 days. Now let us bring this to what it means for real people, because this is not abstract. If you work in shipping, in energy, in logistics, or in anything that depends on supply chain stability through the Persian Gulf corridor, you are not in a stable situation. You are in a managed pause with an expiration date. The difference between stability and a managed pause is enormous when you are planning charters, booking futures, or making capital commitments. The gap between Trump's announcement and Iran's conditions is wide enough to swallow contracts whole. If you have any exposure to energy sector equities, refining companies, LNG producers, tanker operators, you watch those positions swing more than 10% in a single session on the assumption that a real and durable deal was in place. If that deal does not materialize before April 22nd, what was priced out of those stocks this week gets priced back in with compounding velocity. Yeah, and the ripple effects of this conflict have not stayed in the Gulf. Trade routes that companies spent decades optimizing have been upended. Insurance costs for vessels in the region have been at wartime levels for weeks. Shipping lines have been rerouting around longer paths that add days and costs to every voyage. The world's supply chains do not snap back from that kind of disruption on the news of a phone call. They recover over months if the political situation that created the disruption actually resolves. And right now, it has not resolved. Let me put two paths in front of you, because you deserve to see both of them clearly. The first path, before April 22nd, a genuine agreement is reached in Islamabad or wherever Pakistan's mediators convene the next round that substantively addresses Iran's 10-point framework, an agreement that offers credible, verifiable sanctions relief, that provides some framework for compensation for war damages, even if initial, that creates enforceable guarantees against renewed hostilities with language both sides can publicly claim as a win. In that scenario, the blockade lifts. The strait reopens on publicly shared, mutually acknowledged terms. The Lebanon ceasefire holds in a way that does not require daily renegotiation. Oil stabilizes, markets price in a genuine turning point. The worst-case scenarios move off the table, at least for this cycle. The second path, the ceasefire expires April 22nd without a comprehensive deal. The blockade holds. Iran follows through on its parliament speaker's explicit warning. The strait tightens or closes entirely. Oil begins climbing again, and in this time, without the shock absorber of a surprise ceasefire announcement to cushion the upward move. A vessel following White House guidance encounters an IRGC patrol on the wrong morning. And the 2 weeks of ceasefire become a footnote in the introduction to a longer, more destructive phase of a conflict that no one, not the United States, not Iran, not Israel, not the oil markets, not the global economy, has the reserves to absorb indefinitely. I have watched enough of these windows to know they close faster than anyone expects. Let me add one more layer to this picture, because it is essential context. The nuclear file has been at the center of this conflict from the beginning. The United States and Israel struck Iranian nuclear facilities in June 2025. Iran lost significant infrastructure during those strikes. But what the bombings did not do, and this is the part that intelligence analysts have been wrestling with in public reporting, is eliminate Iran's nuclear knowledge, its engineering capacity, or what the New York Times has reported are multiple additional sites, including the Fordo mountain site and others, where enrichment activity may be ongoing. The strikes may have set back Iran's nuclear timeline. They did not end it. So even in the best-case scenario that Trump has publicly described, what is actually being negotiated is voluntary compliance. Iran saying on its own word that it will stop enriching uranium to weapons grade. There is no inspection regime currently agreed to. There is no verification mechanism currently in place. And Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson has been explicit on the record. Enriched uranium will not be transferred anywhere under any circumstance. The Pakistan-mediated discussions in Islamabad, which involved Iran's parliamentary speaker Ghalibaf and U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance with Pakistan as the intermediary, produced by Iran's own account clarity on areas of agreement and remaining red lines. Not a deal. Iran said current talks are centered on ending the war, broadly expanded beyond the nuclear file to include the Strait, sanctions relief, and compensation for war damages. Innovative bilateral solutions may be possible in some areas, Iran said. Others remain non-negotiable. And any claims of direct talks between US and Iranian officials, Iran stated clearly, are false. Everything went through Pakistan, not directly. That is the state of play, not a deal, a framework, a 10-point plan. You had a Pakistan-mediated back channel and a 4-day window before the ceasefire expires. Here is what I want to leave you with. What happened on Friday is not primarily a story about one person making false claims. It is a story about information, about who controls it, who amplifies it uncritically, and what happens when the gap between the announced reality and the documented reality becomes wide enough to drive a tanker through. And those tankers then turn around because the reality and the announcement do not match. The journalists who published Trump's claims verbatim, without independent verification, without countersourcing, without a single line noting that Iran's statements directly contradict this. Those journalists created the conditions for dangerous confusion, not because they made a moral failure, because they made a professional choice to treat a politician's unverified phone call as breaking news in real time in a conflict where getting the facts wrong has real-world kinetic consequences on the water. The shipping data was available. The Iranian statements were available. The contrast between the two was available to anyone who chose to look. None of it required classified information. It required the decision to check what was actually happening instead of transcribing what was being said. The ship that turns around does not lie. The tanker that executes a U-turn at the mouth of the strait is a data point that no press release, no phone call, no Truth Social post, and no market rally can overwrite. Watch the ships. Watch the expiration date of April 22nd. Watch whether the blockade lifts or holds. Yet watch whether Pakistan can bring both sides to language they will each sign. Those are the 4 signals that will tell you whether the deal is real or whether Friday's extraordinary market rally was simply the latest geopolitical risk premium to be priced out before it gets priced back in. If this analysis added something to how you understand this moment, hit like. It genuinely helps David Unfiltered reach more people who need to hear it. Leave a comment. What do you think happens when the clock hits midnight on April 22nd? I read every single comment. And if you are not yet subscribed to David Unfiltered, what are you waiting for? Subscribe. Turn on notifications. We will be here for every development. 3 questions to sit with as you watch this unfold. Is the United States announcing a peace it has not yet secured, or manufacturing the conditions to claim a victory it has not earned? Is Iran's refusal to yield control of the strait a negotiating posture that will eventually soften under pressure, or a structural red line that cannot move, regardless of who is in the room or what is offered? And when the ceasefire expires Wednesday and the world opens its eyes Thursday morning, will the shipping lanes be clear, or will the ships once again be turning around? The field, not social media, will have the answer.